My name is Jessica, and once upon a time they called me the Lucky Woman. I lived in a large, opulent house with a neatly trimmed garden, a kitchen that was always fragrant, and light streaming through the windows. I had two beautiful, healthy children. My husband, David, was the kind of man that everyone on the outside envied. He was successful, handsome, always measured with his words. But me, I was invisible. I started my day at 6 a.m. I didn't need to set an alarm. My body had learned over the years to wake up at that time every morning. I would start the coffee maker, then open the kitchen curtain slightly and watch the silence of the street. The morning melody of the birds, the rustle of the neighbors' automatic lawn irrigation systems. Everything was in its place. Life, from the outside, was as it should be. I ironed David's shirt while he was still asleep. I made his coffee exactly the way he wanted it. 2 sugars, a little milk, never too hot. If I got it wrong, his expression would change, but he wouldn't say a word. Even that silence was like a punishment. I would check the children's bags, review their homework, prepare their lunches, then wake them up with care. It was like a ritual, the same sentences every morning, the same smiles, but inside me, the same gulps. "Jessica is the one who keeps this house going," David would say in front of others. But when we were alone, he once said without looking at me, "As someone who produces nothing, you should accept your place in this house with gratitude." I have that sentence burned into my brain. I was a person who produced nothing. And who kept this house in order? Who stayed up all night with the child who had a fever in the morning and then went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast? Who suppressed all their emotions and put on a mask of peace for everyone in that house? My only crime was being too silent in an order that made my labor invisible. At the time, I was only asking these questions inwardly, because the answer was obvious. What I had to produce was to endure without expecting thanks. Being a woman sometimes meant just that. But you know how there is a core inside a person that doesn't break? Mine was still quiet at that time, but it was ready to crack. And that crack, it started one afternoon with a little note that fell out of David's jacket pocket. David arrived late again that night. He threw his jacket on the back of the sofa in the living room as usual. I didn't expect anything at that moment. It was just an ordinary evening from the outside. Anger stirred inside me, but I suppressed it. I wasn't going to get angry easily, because if there was an argument, it would disturb the children's sleep. I didn't want them to have dark circles under their eyes when they went to school in the morning. I silenced myself with another sip of coffee. But then, that jacket moved, and something small fell out of the pocket onto the floor, a thin, curled piece of paper. I bent down and picked it up. This was no ordinary receipt. It was 2 things rolled up inside each other, a card on top, a hotel bill underneath. On the card was a sentence written in pen, hastily but passionately. "Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was, wow. K." The tips of my fingers turned cold. A pain coursed through my veins. This sentence was not written to me. And David, he would never write something like that. Not to me, not to anyone, I thought. I opened the hotel bill, a hotel in Baltimore. The date was the middle of last month. He was on a so-called business trip that day. My mind immediately went to that week. Lily had gotten sick that night. I had stayed with her all night, taking her temperature every hour, putting a wet washcloth on her forehead. Where was David at that time? Cuddled against someone else's skin, having wow nights. But it wasn't the first time. I knew that. It had just become so visible that I could no longer deny it. This note, it was a turning point. I folded and refolded the paper, and then I placed it in my old recipe book under the kitchen. That was my silent archive, where no one would ever look. For the first time, I had such concrete evidence, but I didn't know what to do with it. And yet, strangely enough, I was in no hurry. Because that night, for the first time, I asked myself out loud, "How long will you be condemned to this life?" And this question, it opened the door to everything inside me that I had silenced for years. I noticed something. David had been going out more often in recent months, but his wallet was almost empty. In the past, a dinner at a restaurant would show up on his credit card statement. Now, it was as if the money left no trace. I started checking his credit card statements. The excuse was easy. I need to check the accounts for groceries. David didn't care much about financial matters anyway. He didn't consider it important enough anyway, so he left it to me. But this gave me an advantage. There were things that stood out in the statements. $1,000 withdrawn, deposited 3 days later, $997. The difference, it was as if it had been tested. A few transactions were from companies I'd never heard of before, like Pine Oak Solutions, Tether and Hill Logistics. It sounded serious, but when I looked into it, I couldn't find any real entities. At first I thought it was a mistake, but there was a repeating pattern. Small but strange deviations every month. And I realized this was no accident. It was a form of concealment that had become a habit. I was a housewife, yes. But you think I wasn't financially literate? I started college. I intended to study business. Until David said, "You don't need to study. I'll take care of you for life." At that time, that sentence warmed my heart. Now it felt like a rope around my throat. At night, when everyone was asleep, I set up my own little research table in the living room. I opened my laptop. I downloaded pages and pages of PDFs. How to check tax returns. What are the signs of unregistered accounts? Examples of internal fraud. I read it line by line, 3 times if necessary. In my notebook, I wrote down the date, the amount, and the titles of suspicious transactions. Now I had a file to go through, not just a wife. David was still in business meetings, but I was now in another meeting, a preparatory process in which I was alone with my own justice. While he was dizzy, I was standing. While he thought he was smart, I was developing an intelligence that would no longer remain silent. And a sentence rose from within me, no longer in a whisper, but in a clear voice. This is the beginning of a plan. Revenge doesn't start with fiery screams like everyone thinks. Sometimes it just starts with deciding to walk more quietly. My battle began not with shouting, but with coupons. I started collecting promotional flyers from grocery chains. I memorized the weekly sale days. I would drop the kids off at school during lunch breaks and compare prices. Yes, on the outside, I still looked like an ordinary housewife. But inside, I was working like a professor of economics. At the end of each week, I put the $5 to $10 left over from shopping in a small glass jar. There was nothing written on the jar, but for me, it had a name, Secret Future. David didn't notice this. To him, $10 was just a large coffee at Starbucks. But for me, these coins were the first markers on the map I had drawn to break free of the chain. I hid a small notebook in the back of the wardrobe between old pillowcases. I was writing full pages. Every cent I spend, every penny I've saved, every scrap of thought I read. Each coupon was not just a discount. It was a document of determination. Between the pages of that notebook were these sentences. Can I go back to university? Online accounting training. How many weeks does it take to complete? Local associations that support women entrepreneurs. The questions may seem small, but these questions gave me something, a sense of control. For years I had been living a life decided by others. When I woke up, when I went to sleep, what I wore, where I went, it was all part of the system. But now, for the first time, I had something outside the system, a tiny space under my control. As that space grew, so did I. A woman's inner battle is not very loud, but it is strong, and if you listen carefully, you can hear it. There is a sound of revolution among the paper coupons. To an outsider, our life still seemed perfect. When David came home from work, I greeted him with a smile. I told jokes at dinner so the children would laugh. On Sunday mornings after church, I had coffee with the neighbors and nodded to those who said, "How lucky you are." But it was a fairy tale, a theater of masks, and I was the best actor in this theater, because inside me, I was ripping off all David's masks one by one. Every role, every word, every look, only bought time. One morning I was ironing his shirt. As I habitually checked his pockets, a small card fell to the floor. When I read the first line, something inside me snapped. Only with you do I feel like myself. Feminine handwriting, round letters, romantic, and a romance that wasn't mine. On another card pinned underneath, in the same pen, was written, "When are you going to tell this woman that you are still married?" In that moment, I didn't swallow my anger. It seeped into me. I took an icy breath and put those cards in the old shoebox. I left a notepad next to it and titled it, "The Collapse of Image." And that night, I turned off the kitchen lights and went to the window. Looking at the dark street, I whispered to myself, I don't intend to hurt this man, to leave him naked. It was clear what was really precious to him: his reputation on the outside, his financial control, the comfort of power. But I was going to take it all, one by one, and I wasn't going to do it with yelling or anger. My weapon was not a ski mask, but a smile. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is when a woman can still stand upright and smile. And behind that smile, an empire falls. David was very confident about technology. He thought he was smart, but the real intelligence is in the details, and he never paid attention to details. One evening, when the children were sound asleep in their room, I slipped quietly into the office. The laptop on his desk was open. The screen was blacked out, but in sleep mode. I touched the mouse. The screen lit up. It asked for a password. I typed in my birthday to try it out. 0614. There was a sound like a door opening. The screen turned on. Something swelled inside me like a wave. That such a fake guy would still use my birthday as a password. It was ironic. But even more ironic was that with this password, I opened the door to the documents that would destroy it. The Gmail tab was open. I browsed through the folders. A folder called Doc Archive caught my attention. I clicked on it and was presented with a stack of documents. Fake consulting invoices, foreign money transfer documents, account statements with names I didn't recognize, some company names with David's handwritten notes underneath. My hands trembled. Part of me wanted to close them and run away, but the other part of me, she was no longer that quiet woman. I went through the documents, I took screenshots, I saved it as a PDF on a flash drive. I dated it, folded it, backed it up. When I went back to bed that night, David was already asleep. His back was turned. My mind was awake. I had power now. But I wasn't going to use it right away, because I had learned, war is not won immediately. You have to wait, be patient, observe. And sometimes the most strategic move is to appear to make no move at all. Information. It is the quietest, most effective weapon in a woman's hand. Until that day, I had only been taught to be patient, to keep silent, and to acquiesce. But now I decided to learn. I had David's documents, but I didn't know what they were for. But I had a feeling. These documents were something, and the moment I began to understand them, I would be in complete control. At 3 o'clock that night, I woke up, not with a nightmare, with determination. My feet automatically took me to the office. The computer was still there. I quietly opened it. I found new folders. Contract backup, W-9 forms, payroll entries. I scanned them all. Even though I didn't quite understand what they were, I sensed something was wrong. Names didn't match on tax forms. Some receipts were issued twice, but the payments were one way. I copied them onto a flash drive. Then I went into the kitchen and opened Max's old Lego box. I carefully placed the flash drive under the colored pieces. I thought to myself, the kid who finds this should get a Harvard scholarship. No one would look in there. But it wasn't enough to keep the documents. I had to understand them. No one was going to teach me. So I became my own teacher. I put Basic Accounting for Beginners on YouTube, then How to Detect Shell Companies, IRS Red Flags, Money Laundering Indicators. I watched it. I rewound some videos 4 times. I opened a notebook. I took notes. I translated English terms into Turkish. I switched to Excel. At first, the formulas were complicated, but one morning I realized I was making a budget. I was planning my own kitchen expenses. Then I looked at David's documents using the same technique. There were gaps, and I could now write them down page after page. It was just the beginning. But in that moment, I realized a woman's revolution does not start with noise. A woman makes a revolution in the light of a computer screen at 3 in the morning. That's exactly how mine started. Years ago, at the beginning of our marriage, I made a strawberry cheesecake. It was our first birthday. When David tasted it, he said, "It's restaurant quality." And then he never said it again. I never made cheesecake again. But that moment, that little memory was like a spark in my brain. What should be the first step? To make money? To be independent? To make my voice heard? Answer: kitchen. I emptied the kitchen cabinets. I wiped the countertop clean from top to bottom. I cleaned the inside of the oven with vinegar water. Before a war begins, trenches are dug, and this countertop was my trench. I went to the market while the children were at school. I lined up coupons, wrote down every price. My hands were shaking as I selected the ingredients, not from excitement, but from responsibility. Because this purchase was the first investment a woman, not a husband, made in her own life. That day, I baked 4 small cheesecakes, strawberry, vanilla-flavored. I gave 3 to the neighbors. Someone's daughter posted a photo on Instagram. She wrote this note underneath: "My new favorite. Tastes amazing." The next day, I got a text: "Can I order these?" When I opened that message, my heart raced. It wasn't a customer. It was a possibility. Maybe it was a small thing. But that silenced voice inside me suddenly started to speak. You exist. You can do it. I got 3 orders that week, $40 total. I didn't tell David. If he asked, I'd say, it was a gesture to the neighbors. But I knew. That $40 was the lock on an exit door. And that lock was about to be unlocked. It was a Sunday morning. It was quiet at home. The kids were watching cartoons. I was in the kitchen stirring pancake batter. The coffee machine rattled and the butter melted in the pan. But that day, David was different. When he sat down at the table, he looked at me for a long time. His look was not what I was used to, not condescending, not indifferent. It was like he was trying to figure me out. Then he asked, "Do you have something new?" I stopped the stirring stick in my hand. I smiled. "No," I said. "Everything is the same." But in that moment, behind that smile, there was a whole new world, because I was not the same anymore. I was hiding the confidence that was bubbling up inside me. Every order, every coupon, every video I watched, he was stacking me up like a brick. The old flickering look in my eyes was gone. It was replaced by a focused determination. David noticed it, but he couldn't make sense of it, because he had drawn his strength from my passivity. Now that balance was being upset. The power was shifting, and David, he always hated what he couldn't control. Like the wind, anything that got out of hand made him restless. I was that wind now, quiet but changing direction, and soon a storm would come out of that wind. Cheesecake orders were increasing every week. Birthday celebrations, brunch plates, special occasions. It was no longer just a hobby, but a regular source of income. But putting that money into David's account, I felt a twist in my stomach just thinking about it. I didn't want his fingerprints on that money. This was my effort, my sleepless nights, my kitchen, my recipes. And I had to put that money somewhere with my name on it for the first time. One morning, I drove the kids to school. On the way back, I saw the little credit union on the corner of the mall. My heart raced. I parked. I walked in. The woman on duty smiled politely. "Are you opening the account with your husband?" I hesitated. For years, I had been evaluating every decision through David's eyes first. But this time, another voice spoke to me. "No," I said. "Alone. Only under my own name." I handed him my ID. My hands were shaking as I filled out the forms, but a weight was lifted from my heart. That day they gave me a bank card, a small plain gray card, but for me, it was a symbol of victory. When I got home, I put that card in the back of my wallet, under the photo of the children. It was hidden, But every day when I touched it, it reminded me, this is yours, it's nobody else's. I made my first purchase with that card a few days later. It was only $11. But when it went through the checkout, I heard a voice inside me. I have you now, and you are growing. David's change was now visible. The man who used to control everything, interfere in everything, was now quiet. He couldn't put the phone down. Even at the dinner table, he stared at the screen, his face tensing slightly when someone typed. He even took the phone with him to the bathroom. It was as if he had the instinctive protectiveness of a criminal. He came in late at night, and some mornings the children went to school without seeing him at the breakfast table. I worked in the office at night, he once said, but there was a wine stain on his jacket. That day, I went out to check the mailbox in front of the house. On the way back, I noticed that the trunk of David's car was open. I wanted to close it, but the smell coming from inside stopped me. Women's perfume, pungent but expensive, a scent I didn't recognize, and my eye was immediately drawn to a small black box. On the top of the box were 2 letters written in gilding, to K. I opened it. A sparkling, elegant diamond necklace. The bill underneath hurt my eyes even more. Lisa's Fine Jewelry. For Carla, Carla. I recognized the name from the note. This was the woman who had left only K on her hotel card. She was no longer mysterious. Now she had a name, her scent, her glow, her gift. It was all there. I picked up the box. I was shaken. But I didn't shed a tear, because that box seemed to me more like proof than pain. This necklace, it wasn't just an affair. It was the first physical evidence to be presented in a court of law. Carla was no longer just a name, and I felt, for the first time, I was not alone in this battle, because now the face of the enemy was clear, and I was ready to fight. I put the box back in its place. I closed the trunk, but another door had opened inside me, and I would never go back through that door again. The evening was busy in the kitchen. Orders were piling up. My hands were full of dough. A cheesecake was baking in the oven. I was wearing an old apron and my hair was haphazardly tied up. But there was no fatigue on my face, just the sweet peace of production. Just then David walked in. His steps were quiet, but his air was heavy. He had something on his mind. I could tell. He looked at me for a long time before approaching the counter. Then he asked, almost in a whisper, "Are you hiding something from me?" Time froze. The spatula in my hands remained motionless. My heart seemed to stop for a moment, but my face never changed. I turned to him, made him look into my eyes. "Like what?" I asked. My voice was calm. So calm it was frightening. David studied my face. It was like he was looking at a stranger. "I don't know," he said. "You've been acting strange." In that moment, every silence, every tear, every scorn I had accumulated over the years came out in that one look, but not in words, in my posture, with my eyes. "Maybe it's strange," I said, "that I am no longer the same woman as you." The cake in the oven was about to overflow when I finished that sentence, but I didn't care. Because that sentence, for the first time, it shattered the order David had built up over the years. Sometimes men aren't shaken by a slap. It's more shocking when a woman realizes she's no longer afraid of him. David was silent for a few seconds. Then he turned and walked out. But there was something in his eyes as he left. Concern. I watched that worry, and I realized I was no longer the one who was afraid in this house. It was him, and this feeling. It was so strong that it was addictive. Finding the cracks in David's life had become a habit, but it was a habit that required a careful eye and patience. My eyes that used to look only at the kitchen shopping list. Now they were burrowing into financial documents, pay stubs, credit card statements. Every month I was the first to receive the envelopes in the mailbox. They didn't look like the children's school permission slips, but among them, a woman was quietly building her revolution. Some things didn't match up on the bank statements. Double paid bills. spending in different cities on the same day. Or sometimes just a strange discrepancy, 3,254.13 instead of 3,254.12. But the most striking was a change of address on an electricity bill, the one under David's name, Glenbrook Court, flat 402. At that moment, a chill went through me. I looked up the address on Google Maps. An apartment with white tulle curtains hanging from the balcony came up on the screen. I rotated the camera. There was a black SUV parked right next to the house. It looked like David's car. I took my hand off the mouse. I grabbed a piece of paper. I printed out a screenshot of the address. I wrote under it in pencil, "If you have a house, what do you need a wife for?" I put this note in an envelope and placed it in a drawer, but I didn't send it, because I wasn't playing games anymore. David had played games. He cheated. He hid it. But I was infiltrating the system. Quietly, deliberately, professionally. He didn't know what he had anymore, but I knew exactly what I was fighting. And in that fight, the most effective weapon was silence. Silence and a woman's determination. The catering business was transforming not only my kitchen, but also my life. Every delivery was more than an order. The door of each house opened into the inner world of another woman. And most of the time, when I stepped inside, I was handed not only a cookie box, but also a secret. Some women were quiet at first, but I could see it in their eyes, those tired but patient eyes. The look of a woman who has lost herself but forgets herself to keep her children alive. One day the woman I delivered the order to opened the door. She had makeup on her face, but her eyes were swollen from crying. I handed her the package. She thanked me, then quietly added, "It's comforting to talk to you. It's like I know you." I stopped for a moment, then I smiled. Maybe we are all living the same story with different words. That sentence. It connected us. The night of that day, I texted her, "I'm starting a small group just for us women. Do you want to join?" I called the WhatsApp group Silent Women, but it was ironic, because those inside were as powerful as their silence. I wrote the first rule of the group myself: never talk about your husband, only about who you are. The first day we were 4 women. 3 days later, 8. 17 within a week. I gritted my teeth to keep from crying at the checkout at the grocery store today, one wrote. Another responded with a heart emoji. Another posted a photo of the first cake she ever made. "Jessica's recipe," she wrote underneath. Every message, every emoji, even every "I am so tired today" connected us, because we felt that we were not alone, because one woman could hold another woman's hand, even from a distance. And I knew when women come together, no system can stand. Walls crack, curtains tear, silence begins to speak. We were the first spark of that crackling. Now the end of the road was in sight, but this time the end was not a fall. It was an exit. For years I had been in a room with a closed door. Now I was opening it myself. I secretly decided to see a woman lawyer. I scheduled the appointment for the children's school time. After the bus picked them up, I left the house under the pretext of shopping. It was a nameless office in the alley across from the grocery store I always went to. A small signboard, a dried plant in front of the window. But inside, it gave me a feeling I hadn't felt in years. Trust. I opened the door. The woman inside, gray hair, glasses, a calm voice, smiled at me. "Come in," she said. I sat in the chair. My hands were shaking a little, but my voice was clear. "I want a divorce." The woman looked at me over her glasses. She didn't rush, she did not judge, she just asked a question. "Do you have proof?" My answer was ready, because I had prepared for months. 3 folders on a USB stick. Secondary real estate, fake company, false statements, all linked to my husband's name. The lawyer smiled, but it was an appreciative smile, not a pitying one. "Most women come crying," he said. "You came with a plan." I looked into his eyes. "Because I still haven't cried," I said. They wanted me to cry, but I chose to remain silent, calculatingly. That's when I realized. Sometimes the biggest scream is a silent strategy, and mine was starting now. Legal, cold-blooded, and inevitable. My lawyer explained the process to me in detail. If we file a lawsuit with the right documents, property can be divided. I can be given custody of the children. And most importantly, criminal proceedings could have been initiated. But I could not call any of this enough because it wasn't just about justice. It was about settling accounts. I kept silent for years. For years, I minimized myself. I withdrew. I managed. But I was no longer the old Jessica. I was no longer the woman who was patient, but the woman who fought. "We have a strong case," my lawyer told me. I smiled. "So do I," I said. "I'm stronger than that case." This case was not just about my marriage. It was an echo of the swallowed stories of thousands of women like me. It was the cry of single mothers, wives who secretly saved money, women who forgot their names. I wasn't filing for divorce. I wanted to leave a small but real mark on history. One day, when a woman says to herself, "I can't do it," I wanted her to remember my name. I was not a victim. I was the transformation. I was the woman who rewrote the ending of her own story. And this time, I was holding the pen in my hand. When I handed the documents on the flash drive to my lawyer, I felt both fear and relief. Once the documents were in the system, everything was official. David's name was no longer just the name of a wife. It had become the headline for false company registrations, suspicious transfers, and tax evasion. But we didn't act immediately. My lawyer was patient. "The blow must be struck when he is most unprepared," he said. It was hard to wait, but we kept quiet, because this silence was the calm before the storm. That week, I was busier than ever in the kitchen. It was as if each recipe was a combination of anger, patience, and hope. 20 cheesecakes, a brunch package for 12 people, 3 special birthday orders. My Instagram message box was overflowing. My customers were no longer taking orders, but stories. At night, when I was cleaning the counter in the kitchen, my hands covered in flour, I was thinking one sentence: I'm in. And that week, when I saw the first $1,000 I deposited into my secret bank account, I took a screenshot on my phone screen. Date, time, balance. I wrote a little note underneath. Not the first, but the unforgettable one. I am no longer just a woman seeking justice. I am now someone who pays herself a salary, who invests in her life, who rebuilds rather than destroys. The documents had spoken. It was time for my voice. It was a Friday afternoon. I had picked up the children from school, and we were on our way home, listening to their conversation in the back seat as usual. I stopped by the mailbox. Advertisements, envelopes of bills, and an anonymous but expensive paper envelope. I opened it. A single photograph. David and Carla, in Miami, at a yacht club. On the beach in the sun, hugging and kissing. There was nothing written on the back of the photo. But that silence was like a shouted message. I know, now you know. My hand was still shaking when I parked the car. Carla. She should have sent me this photo. But why? Did she want to scare me? Or was she looking for help? I felt something. It wasn't a declaration of war, but a sign. That night, after the kids were asleep, I set up a fake profile on Instagram. No profile picture, no followers, just a single message. I'm Jessica, not his wife, not his victim. I'm not David's past anymore. If you want to know what he's keeping from you, we can talk. I sent the message and put the phone down. I looked back and forth at the screen until morning. A day later, I got a reply. And I thought I knew everything about him. Please meet me. 2 days later, we met in a small, quiet cafe. When he arrived, his hands were shaking, but there was an anger on his face that he had repressed for years. We sat down. We ordered our coffees in silence. We looked at each other for a long time before we spoke. It was like looking in a mirror. Different lies from the same man, different scripts written for the same woman, but the same control, the same scars. We had both been extras in someone else's scene, but now we were ready to burn that stage together. Because neither of us is in the shadows anymore. We were the light itself. On my second meeting with Carla, she came with a notebook. It contained handwritten notes, some email printouts, and part of an agenda. She told me about David's contacts abroad, some suspicious companies he did business with. Names, cities, dates. What she said, combined with the documents I had, formed a chain. This was no longer a divorce case. This was a map of a financial fraud organized at the federal level. I went to my lawyer. I told him what had happened in a non-confidential manner. This is no longer something that can be resolved quietly, I said. This has to go public. A few days later, my lawyer introduced me to a woman. She is an investigative journalist working in New York. She had been writing about women's rights and corruption for years. We spoke over Zoom. As I sat in front of the screen, I still had a voice inside me. "Don't do this. Don't get into trouble," he was saying. But then another voice. "They stepped on your head for years. Now it's your turn," he said. I showed him the documents. I opened the folders on the USB stick, shared the screen. Photos, invoices, forged signatures, and finally account transactions that matched the information Carla had provided. The journalist silently took notes. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Jessica, this is not just a revenge story. This could be the voice of thousands of invisible women in America, and you gave that voice the first word." I was silent, but my eyes welled up, because for the first time, someone didn't just see me as a housewife. For the first time, someone had not only heard my voice, they wanted to amplify it. 2 weeks later, I was having my morning coffee and the TV was on. In the background, the kids were putting on their shoes, and I was making a shopping list for the evening's orders. Then the anchor's voice caught my attention. "An ordinary Baltimore housewife has uncovered $1 million corporate corruption ring." My hand slipped from the pen. I looked up. There was no face on the screen, but I was in the sentences. Only my first name was Jessica, no last name. My face was blurred, but the story was clear. "After years of invisibility, a woman has broken her silence with a document," the announcer said. "The documents triggered scandals spanning multiple companies." At that moment, my heart almost stopped. This was not in front of a camera. I was in the middle of reality, and for the first time, I was not alone. The first message came from an Instagram account I didn't recognize. "I want to be like you. Thank you." Then an email. I cried because I was silent for years too. Then a note left on my doorstep. "Heroes don't always come with capes. Sometimes they come with oven mitts." Panic broke out at the company David worked for. Human Resources put him under internal investigation. His emails were analyzed, his office computer confiscated. One of his partners officially announced his departure when the story was reported. It was David's first serious blow in the business world, combined with Carla's documents. A seemingly unshakable structure began to crack. It was ironic. For years I had cleaned his shoes, ironed his ties, and remained silent in the background of his success story. Now I was the first sentence of his downfall story, and that sentence was now on the agenda of the country. David came home earlier than usual the day he was fired from the company. Through the window, I saw him angrily park the car. He closed the door so hard that the family photo hanging in the frame slid slightly to the side. He didn't take off his shoes. He kicked them off and threw them on the carpet in the entryway. There was silence in the kitchen, but the tension was rising like steam through my hands. I had prepared a special dinner for that day, baked chicken parmesan, with a fresh spinach salad and lemon tart. But it was for one plate, one fork, and the tablecloth was laid with the patterned one I'd bought, not the one he liked. David entered the kitchen. He stopped for a moment. He looked at the table, at the plate, then at me. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I didn't answer. He just opened the refrigerator door and took out a beer. His hand was shaking as he opened it. He was trying to suppress the anger boiling inside him. He spoke without looking at me. "This happened because of you, all because of your games." I approached the table. I pulled the plate in front of me, took the fork in my hand. I kept an eye on him. "No, David," I said. It's just that what was hidden from you is now visible." My sentence rang through the room like a slap, but it wasn't a physical blow. It was something much deeper. A silent blow to his pride, his power, his obsession with control. David didn't respond. For the first time. He turned his back and went into the living room. He turned on the TV while he drank his beer. But he couldn't hear the sound. I sat at my table. I ate my dinner in silence. My bites were a celebration. To myself, to my patience, to my plan, to my endurance. Not a word was spoken at the table that night, but I spoke, not words. And the power shifted. For the first time he was silent, and I'm full. My lawyer and I had started the official process. The divorce case had been filed, and the atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. The right step was to make a new start in another neighborhood so that the children would not be psychologically affected. My heart was pounding as I looked at the ads. For the first time, I was making a decision on my own, without needing any man's signature, approval, or opinion. And finally I found it. A small house, 1 story, detached. In the garden, the shadow of an old tree fell on the porch. The walls were painted light blue. There was a stove in the corner of the living room. There was no shouting in the house. There was no running from footsteps inside the house. Inside the house, there was only peace. When the moving day came, I excitedly told the children, "This house will be our new adventure." My daughter Lily picked up her toys and looked out the window. My son Max glanced at the walls, ran into the kitchen, then said softly, "Mom, it's quieter here at night." I gasped for a moment. My throat tightened, because the children also recognized peace in silence. It turned out that it was not the sound, but the silence that harbored fear. For years I thought they were safe. They had only learned to shut up. When I took the key to the new house in my hand, the sound of the lock was like an opening, not a closing. I went inside. I looked at the empty walls, the clean kitchen, the curtains dancing in the wind, and the tears came, silently for the first time. But this time, not from pain, but from joy. This house was a shelter, but it was also a delivery room, the birthplace of my new life. And this time, there was no pain, no screaming, only acceptance and freedom. When David received the subpoena, he reacted more strongly than I expected. The first message came at midnight. The words that appeared on the screen were the digital form of anger and loss of control. Curses, threats, accusations. They were not written to a woman, but to the frustration of a man who was losing his power. The next morning I learned that he had reached my lawyer. "We've been slandered. This is a revenge case," he said, as if I had been part of a game for years. But it wasn't an attack. It was just desperation, because his words could no longer compete with the documents. I now had an army on my side, and this army was not people, but evidence. Carla's detailed testimony, dossiers on news channels, digital traces on my USB stick, bank receipts in my name, analysis tables on fake companies, and most importantly, a changed me. I was no longer just a wife or a mother. I had redefined myself. I was a mother, yes, but I was also an entrepreneur, a woman who analyzed like an accountant, documented like a journalist, waited patiently like a warrior. When David realized this, it was too late, because his past no longer defined me. I was now the definition of my own future. Sitting in the waiting room of the courtroom, a bottle of water in my hand, my eyes locked on the clock on the wall. My heart was pounding, but it was not fear. I was on the verge of a reckoning that had been suppressed for years. That justice was so close. It makes a person look upright on the outside, but causes a silent tremor on the inside. The door opened. David walked in. His jacket was rumpled, his beard unshaven, but what struck me most were his eyes. He didn't look at me. For the first time, he seemed too small to make eye contact. The man who had been a giant in my eyes for years was now unable to support his own weight. We went into the courtroom. The judge's voice was clear, but for me, every word was like an echo. My lawyer presented the documents. He spoke in an organized manner, without a pause. Carla took the witness stand. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were clear. "I was deceived too," she said, "but I will no longer remain silent." When it was my turn to have the last word, a strange silence came over me, a kind of peace. I stood up. I took a deep breath. Then I said, "In this marriage, I have been not only a wife, but also an invisible worker, a mother, and a silencer. But now I stand in this courtroom only under my own name, as Jessica. I don't need a last name." No one in the courtroom spoke. Only that sentence hung in the air like it was written on the wall. When I came out of there, I knew that justice had been served not only in court, but also within myself. 3 weeks of silence. Every day during the court process, I waited for news from my lawyer. My hand was shaking when I picked up the phone, but the Jessica in me was no longer the old Jessica. No matter what the outcome, I was not going to lose myself at the end of this story. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. The judge read the papers without any emotion on his face. I was awarded 100% custody. My children were now officially in my care. David kept the house, but with its mortgages, its debts, its burdens, every wall in that house would carry the weight of a past that was no longer mine. He was obliged to pay a large monthly alimony. My years of unpaid labor now had a price. And most importantly, all documents were officially turned over to the federal prosecutor's office for investigation. As I left the courtroom, David had to make eye contact with me. He didn't look arrogant. His shoulders were slumped. His gaze was blank, like a man who is trying to understand but still can't figure it out. I did not smile at him. Victory was not a smile on my face, but a posture that said to him, "I won, but not by crushing you, lifting myself up." And that look, I will remember it for the rest of my life, because that moment was not only a verdict, but also my acquittal in my own court as a woman. My catering business had outgrown the kitchen. From labeled containers in the fridge to orders on Instagram, I was no longer selling just homemade sweets, but a story. Every cheesecake, every cookie, born of a woman's silent rebellion. My Instagram page reached 10,000 followers. Women weren't asking for recipes in the comments. They were encouraged. "I'm proud of you. I started too. I want to be like you." One day, I received an invitation in my email box. Local Women Entrepreneurs Fair. I felt all warm and fuzzy inside. This was going to be my first showcase where I didn't keep myself hidden. I proudly told those who asked the name of my brand, "From burnt to baked." From burnt to baked. Because I not only knew how to cook, I knew how to burn, and to give birth to something from those burns. There was a small card on the stand next to my handmade sweets. Every recipe is the rebirth of a woman. I am no longer just a cook. I became a brand, a story, a hope. Notifications from Instagram were no longer just orders. Every day I received a message from a woman. Some wrote with tears, some with just one sentence, but they all carried the same emotion. "You gave me courage." One day I saw a message in my inbox that started with this sentence: "I can't leave the house, but I can breathe when I watch your videos." That's when I decided, not only to make my own path, I wanted to pave a path that others could walk. I set aside 30% of my Instagram profits. I called it the Silent Power Fund. I was going to give micro grants to women entrepreneurs. The first person I was going to support. She was an immigrant mother of 3. She had been a house cleaner for years. But there was one thing she had always dreamed of: to sell spicy street food. We bought a street cart for him. The first day's menu was Mexican corn, homemade sauces, and in the center of the counter, a sign, "Jessica's Spice. From fear to courage, it starts with a spoon." This is how chains are broken. A woman walks, the other follows your light, and in the end, that chain becomes a golden bracelet for others. When I was offered an interview by a local TV channel, I first held the phone in my hand. I looked at the screen for a long time. The first sentence that went through me was, "Who am I?" I was just a woman who had been silenced for years. But then I went to the mirror. I took a long look at myself, and for the first time I really saw I was no longer just a housewife. There was a woman who had been reborn. When the day of the interview came, I did my hair myself. I didn't wear makeup, because I didn't need to cover anything anymore. Not my face, not my emotions, not my past. The cameras were set up. The journalist looked into my eyes and asked, "What was the biggest change in your life?" My answer was clear. Before my lips moved, my heart had already answered. I now speak without apologizing. I now laugh without diminishing myself. And I no longer live in a man's shadow, but in my own light. At that moment, there was silence in the studio. And in that silence, the voices of thousands of women echoed. One morning, after the children had gone to school, I was alone in the kitchen. There was silence, but this time it was a silence born of peace, not loneliness. In my old kitchen, I once mixed cakes while crying. Now, in my professional kitchen, the oven was working. A cinnamon cake was baking inside. The smell filled the whole room, but more than that, it invaded my past. I made a coffee. I took my mug and sat on a chair in the corner of the kitchen. You know, the corner where I made the first plans, where I wrote secret expenses in a notebook. It was no longer a refuge, but a field of triumph. And I thought, Jessica Monroe. Years ago, she was a woman who lived only for others. Someone who wakes up at 6 a.m, irons shirts, whose voice is not heard. But now, the court rulings were behind him. She was the founder of a brand. She was a figure who had a voice in the media and gave hope to women. And at that moment, I noticed something lying on the table, a picture my children had drawn. The edges are crumpled, but the color is still vibrant. It was me in the picture. I was wearing a cape, arms outstretched, floating in the air. Above the picture was written in big letters, "My mom is a hero." Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time not out of sadness, because now I was the protagonist of my own story. My children would memorize this story, not a victim. They were going to tell the story of a hero.